Welcome back to the PFC podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC podcast. This is Dennis, and today I am with Ephraim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show.
Perfect. So, from what I understand, you have a lot of experience in Burma, and I think it's really important for us to, one, kind of understand the conflicts that are happening around in our world, and two, learn from things from any place that we possibly can, just to make us better all the way around. So before we really begin, would you mind doing a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. No problem. My name is Ephraim Matos, and I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, graduated high school 2010, joined the Navy, was a SEAL for a few years, and then I got out in 2017. During my time in the SEALs, I was not a medic. I was a radio man and sniper. And then in 2017, I got out of the Navy, and I basically started doing humanitarian aid work in conflict zones. And that has resulted in me, unfortunately, being put in a lot of medical situations using my basic TCCC capabilities. And then I also was EMT qualified for a short time. I did not maintain the certification. So that's the highest level of medical training that I have. But right now I run an organization called Stronghold Rescue and Relief that I founded right after getting out of the Navy. And basically what we do is we take veterans and we go into conflict zones to provide medical care and also to protect refugees in any ways that we can. So that's the big reason why we're in Burma. We've been working in Burma for 5 years. In different capacities. And one of our biggest missions there is medical care, because it's a very austere, very difficult environment to work in, very difficult to get medical care to people at the point of injury, which we'll dive into a little more. So that's primarily my focus right now is on Burma. I just got back from basically I spent about 6 months in Burma over this last year, with basically like a 1 month break right in the middle. So mostly dealing with the security situation, and then also definitely had some major medical scenarios that we were faced with dealing with. Yeah.
No, it sounds like you're the perfect guy. So, all I know about what's going on in Burma is what I gathered from Rambo 4. So, in preparation, I rewatched Rambo 4. So I think I'm caught up to speed, but just in case I missed something, would you mind giving us some kind of background of this conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rambo 4 is actually, obviously it's a very dramatized version of what's going on, but in general, all the different things that you see happening in there, how the Burma army is treating the ethnic minorities and all that stuff, in general, all of that's actually very, very true. So obviously it's a fictional situation, but that conflict and a lot of the atrocities that you saw in there are very, very, very real. And I've personally witnessed a lot of the same stuff that you see in the movie. I've seen it myself with my own eyes. So basically what's going on, so at the end of World War II, the British left Burma, and long story short, they basically left the ethnic Burmese in charge of the country, because the ethnic Burmese controlled the central portion of the country. They left all their military supplies, for the most part, with the Burmese. Now, the problem was the Burmese had actually sided with the Japanese and had fought against the British, but then they switched sides when they saw that the Japanese were losing the war. So what ended up happening is the ethnic Burmese, and again, not all ethnic Burmese, but the central sort of Burmese military government, they took control and started basically trying to take control of the entire country. And they want to, the goal is for them to basically subjugate all the ethnic minorities around all the areas of the country. Now, the problem is, the ethnic minorities obviously are going to fight back. They're not going to put up with that. But then the other thing is, the regions around the borders of Burma a lot of them are very mountainous. And so, there's very natural kind of, strongholds, if you will, that the ethnic minorities are able to kind of defend themselves from. So because of that, neither army is strong enough to completely defeat the other army. It's sort of like the situation in Ukraine. So it's this never-ending war that's been going on for 75 years or so, and so that's the situation we see today. Most recently, back in as of a few years ago, the Burma military, which controls the government, right? It's like if General Petraeus and General Mattis got together and they were like, "Hey, we're going to use the Marines and the Army, and we're going to control. We're going to now be the U.S. government," right? That's the situation that's happening in Burma. So, as of a few years ago, there were some sort of fake quasi steps toward democracy. They were just sort of formal, and they weren't actually real. They didn't. The people who were duly elected in Burma they didn't really have any power. But 2 years ago, basically the Burma army just completely did away with any of those sort of fake steps that they were taking toward democracy. And they were just like, no, we're still in charge. And so, but because of that, the people completely revolted. So even people who had not been being persecuted before that, they decided to rise up against the Burma army. And so for the last 2 years, the civil war has spread not just from the outer regions of the country, but through the entire country itself, in the cities, in the places where the Burma army used to have their safety and their strongholds. Now those places are hotbeds of resistance to the Burma army's control. So the war has become significantly more violent and much more prevalent around the entire country.
Right. Oh, that's horrible. So just, I just did a quick Google search, so I'm not at all an expert. But I also saw, Chinese and Russian influence. Have you noticed that?
Yes, absolutely. So the Russians in particular, they sell fighter jets to the Burma army. So the Burma army, they primarily make their own weapon system. So they have their own rifle that they make. They have their own assembly lines for making all that stuff from raw materials. But the fighter jets they buy specifically from Russia. They just recently bought a new batch of fighter jets, and I've personally seen these fighter jets many times flying right over my head. Bombing villages, bombing whatever they want to bomb under whatever pretense they want to bomb. So definitely a Russian influence there, no doubt. Mostly just the Russians are helping prop the Burma army up and helping them with supplies. Mm-hmm. The Chinese influence is primarily in the northern part of the country near the Chinese border. And so one of the unique things about the Chinese is that they kind of play both sides. And so in some ways, they'll side with the Burma army because it benefits them. Sometimes they'll side with the resistance groups because it benefits them. In the end, China just wants to have influence over whoever's in charge. My personal opinion is I don't think the Chinese really care if the Burma army stays in charge. They just want to make sure that they have influence over whoever does end up becoming in charge if the Burma army was to fall at some point.
Yeah. Well, try to just keep your toe inside the door, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So I think I understand what's going on. So, I mean, are these just occasional clashes or are there actual full-on fights going on?
This is a full-on war. This is a full-on war to the extent that the entire country is engulfed in it. And I know it's kind of difficult to understand that or sort of visualize it because when we think full-on war, we think the Ukraine-Russia conflict with massive front lines and troops and tanks and all that stuff. The same level of, intensity is happening in Burma, but it's much more guerrilla versus conventional forces. So it's an asymmetrical war to an extent where the Burma army has more control. They're backed by fighter jets. They've got a lot more ammo and much better weapons and things like that. And their guys are much more heavily trained. But all the different resistance groups, all the pro-democracy groups, they're everywhere, and so it's a massive. I guess sort of since 2021, the war has now become more of the Burma army is trying to occupy a foreign country, as opposed to them occupying their own country. Because now the entire army is in an inhospitable environment. I would equate it to some of the challenges that we would see, like in the U.S. military in Iraq, facing Al Qaeda sort of thing. Obviously, the moral lines are totally different, so I'm not equating those two situations. But the Burma Army in this case is like the American military trying to maintain control of a country that doesn't want you there, and that's sort of the situation that we're seeing right now. So it is full on war with large troop movements on both sides, massive attacks on both sides, days when dozens and dozens of soldiers on both sides are killed in large scale battles. And then there's also the constant guerrilla attacks. There's the constant mortaring, surprise attacks from the Burma Army onto civilian populations, and the whole thing's it's a full on war. Yeah.
Okay. So just from that description, I can imagine the type of injuries that you're getting. But what are you actually seeing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I run an organization called Stronghold Rescue and Relief, and what we do, one of our primary missions is to provide medical care. We're only working in one particular sector of Burma. We're not all throughout the country. We're just in kind of one main area. There's an endless need throughout the entire country, but so the place where we work, we're seeing we do see a lot of war injuries. So currently we run three truck ambulances, and then we have a boat ambulance as well. And we run them full time. They're staffed by the local people, because you'd be surprised, like a lot of the local people have lots of good medical training. What they don't have is the supplies or the organization to make anything happen. So our role there is we provide them the supplies, we provide them the organization, we provide them the trucks and the know-how and all that. And then they are the ones providing medical care for their own people, using supplies that we purchase. And so we're there on the ground with them, mentoring them, as opposed to doing everything for them. That's sort of a sidetrack. We call it charity with dignity. It's about enabling people to fish, right? Instead of just giving them a fish. Anyway, so with that being said, our patients who our ambulances are transporting, we see literally everything. We have everything from pregnant women with ectopic pregnancies to a couple weeks ago we had a kid fell out of a tree and he was impaled on a stick, and so our ambulance evacuated him. Lots of war injuries. I think 2 days ago or maybe 3 days ago, I get all the updates from the guys in the field. There was a civilian stepped on a landmine, blew his leg off. Just this morning, I got a message of a soldier who'd been shot. I'm not sure if it was a gunshot wound or shrapnel in his right chest, and he was being evacuated on our ambulance boat. So we see all of that stuff. But the other thing too is our patients are also, we're dealing with sort of clinical medicine issues as well. So there's people with malaria, people with just different ailments, elderly folks who are not doing well. And so our ambulances transport all of that. And we're the only dedicated medical asset for tens of thousands of people in this one particular area where we work. Now, where we take our patients is there's a pretty solid medical clinic being run by another NGO, and they keep their identity a little bit secret and what they're doing. But they're fantastic. They're an American NGO, and they have actual doctors. They have an actual, they're able to do surgery. They're able to do really, really good stuff in the middle of the jungle. So you walk into their operation room and it's a big tent that's been sterilized, and they have operating tables and lights, and they can do anesthesia. And they can do everything basically that they need to do there to keep patients alive. The next level of care after that clinic is oftentimes they'll get patients that are very severe and that can't be fully taken care of there. They'll be evacuated out of the country to different routes using different NGOs and different, actually not, there's no other NGOs that I know of that do the evacuations. It's the local Karen, government. So we work with the Karen tribe in Burma. So it's the local Karen government, medical care system that, evacuates the people out of the country and gets them, to a higher level of care.
Okay. So, just, I guess, in your head, picking a random case, how long would it be from, you get the word that somebody needs you for your ambulance service, you go out, you pick them up and get them back to that NGO that has, real doctors in it?
Yeah, so that process can take, I'll say under best case scenario, let's say we have a soldier who's wounded at the front lines of where the fighting is. From the point of him getting injured, it's going to take at least 4 or 5 hours just for him to get to the bank of this very large lake, which is one of our biggest sort of natural obstacles. That's going to take him 4 or 5 hours to get there. Once there, that's where we have our initial dedicated, that's where our boat ambulance is. That's where our full-time staff is. So basically 4 or 5 hours just to get to the boat. The boat takes at least an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to get across this man-made lake, because there's a lot of obstacles and trees and things like that in the lake. And then once they get to the far side of the lake, there's always an ambulance on standby there, and so the medics will reassess the patient, and then it's at least 3 to 4 hours from that point to get them to the based on the condition of the roads, to get them to the actual doctors who really know what they're doing. So you're looking at anywhere, absolute best case scenario, if everything is running smooth and everybody's ready to go, 9 hours. 9 hours is your fastest, is the fastest it could be. Realistically, it ends up being probably double that. If you're injured at night, if you're injured in a more difficult location, the enemy is constantly moving around. So you're looking at very, very long travel times. And just this morning, actually, I was talking with the local ethnic leader there at the hospital, or at the clinic that we send our patients to, and he was telling us that right now, over the last couple of days, our ambulances can't drive because the roads are so bad because of all the rain. And so I was talking with him. I was like, well, how long does it take to move a patient? And he was saying it takes 2 days to carry a patient from the bank of the lake up to the clinic. It takes 2 days because they have to carry the patient on a bamboo pole, and they put the patient in a hammock on the bamboo pole. And if they can get enough people to help carry, it takes 2 days. So our ambulance service cuts that time from 2 days down to about 4 hours. And that's if the driver isn't even driving crazy. So the amount of time it takes to get medical care, like legit medical care, is very, very long. It's a very, very challenging environment.
So I imagine with such long transport times, those medics and whatever level medical personnel are on that boat and in that ambulance after the boat ride, do you or does somebody have like a medical training or medical refresher or some kind of way to keep their skills up? Because
absolutely,
that's all you got.
Yeah, absolutely. So the clinic that we take our patients to, they're not just a clinic; they're also a school. So they have a 5-year PA program. So they have I forget, I think it's maybe 8 to 10 students every year that graduate. But yeah, they put them through a 5-year program. So that the medics who come out of there, they're all people from that area. They're all people who live in that, who are from that tribe. They come out with a very high level of training, and they're able to get lots and lots of experience at the clinic itself. So our ambulances are staffed by local people from who are from the area who have PA level training. There's also local sort of, I guess we call them like military medics. Their training, to be perfectly honest, is really not good, and I've got a good story about that too at some point. But so there are legit medical professionals that are working these cases, and again, it's all the locals, and they are able to get refresher training. One of the things that we do at Stronghold is we do provide medical refresher training and even initial stop the bleed training. I wouldn't say quite to a TCCC level because it's just not the case, but we're able to get them for all the different soldiers and even the civilians. We provide training for civilians. This last year, year and a half ago, I sent a team into Burma, and they trained a group of, I think it was about 10 trainers, trained the trainers on basic TCCC, how to make improvised splints, all that kind of stuff, stop the bleed. If you have basically nothing on you, what do you do? And those trainers went to 60 different villages, and they trained hundreds and hundreds of villagers on how to just do these basic things that, are very rudimentary for us, but the villagers have never heard of. And keep in mind, the villagers are always at the point of injury because they're always the ones getting attacked. They're constantly getting bombed. They're constantly getting, having all these different injuries. And there's just no way for them to, get medical care. It's going to take hours and hours for a medic to get there. So, we do provide some of that very basic training, but the PAs and those higher level folks, they're trained and they get their training at the clinic run by the other NGO. Perfect.
So you mentioned a story. I love stories. So,
yeah, great. So, this story actually goes really well into sort of the prolonged field care and is sort of a personal experience that I had with the situation. So, like I said, I run an organization called Stronghold Rescue and Relief. We currently have 3 ambulances and a boat ambulance. However, as of 6 months ago or 6 or 7 months ago, we didn't have that. We were in the process of initially setting all this stuff up. And because it takes time, it's a difficult process. So during that time, I was basically at the front line, of where all the fighting is. And, one of my roles at that point was basically to help provide medical support to any kind of situation or something that pops up. At the time I had 2 interpreters with me. So there was a big battle right around dawn in one of in one of these remote villages. We were in 2 different locations, where the fighting was happening. At the other location, there was one of the pro-democracy good guys was shot through the knee. And he was shot around 6 a.m. and it took them 2 hours to evacuate him to get over to us. They had a local medic with him who was able to stabilize him, which was good. However, around 8 a.m., I got a second set of eyes on the patient, and so I went up to look at this patient. He was laying in a Skedco litter that they had used to transport him. That was something that Stronghold had provided, and we were training the soldiers how to use it. And so I get over there to look at this patient, and I knew that he'd been shot in the leg, but his face was just ashen white, and he's a dark-skinned Asian guy. And I'm like, why is your face like whiter than mine? And I'm like, you just had a simple gunshot wound. Like, you shouldn't be looking like this. You know that look, like this dude looks like he's going to die. He's not doing well. And so I went and looked at him. He was conscious. There was 2 local medics working on him at the time. And, I was like, something's off here. So I went and I tried to look at the injury, but I couldn't see the injury. What they had done was they had taken, 3 bandanas and had used sticks as windlasses to try to stop the bleeding. And I was like, I don't know, something's off. So I pull up my trauma shears. I cut open the soldier's leg, his pants, and I expose the injury and I look at it, and there's blood is still oozing out of the exit wound, and there's bits of bone fragment and all that. So he had definitely been shot right through the knee, and so there was the bone had been fractured. And clearly what had happened, one of his arteries had been sliced, and so he's still bleeding. And the tourniquets they put on him were good enough to slow the bleeding, but they were not good enough to stop the bleeding. And so when I cut open his pants, probably like a liter of blood that had pooled in his pants because he was laying on the ground in the Skedco litter just came gushing out. And I was like, no. So I grabbed one of my personal tourniquets, a cat tourniquet, threw it on his leg. And, of course he started, I told the guys, I was like, hold him down. Cause like, this is going to hurt. And so of course he starts screaming cause it hurts. I'm like, all right, that means I did it right. And I just sat there and I watched the blood, coming out of his leg. I watched it slowly, diminish and ultimately turn off, just like slowly turning off the spigot, right? Like turning off the water spigot. So under those conditions, I was able to stabilize the patient and was like, okay, he's not going to die now. So what ended up happening was both of the medics, that we only had 2 medics with us, and we were with a group of, I don't know, there was maybe 100 or so soldiers in this particular area. And there's still fighting going on, by the way. There's still mortar fire, sniper fire. There'd been heavy fighting in the morning. The fighting has died down, but it's still going on. There's still explosions going off everywhere. And we're at the front line. Well, the 2 medics take the patient with the gunshot wound to the leg. They take him and they both go with him. And the next level of care, is actually, it's like 6 hours away. in a very, very remote area, but they both left with him, which was obviously not cool. But they just didn't really think through that situation. So I go back to, we go back to one of the villages, and that was around, again, 8:30, 9 a.m. Well, then at 11 a.m., I got a call on the radio. One of my interpreters had been hit in the head. And they were like, you need to come look at him. And I'm the only quasi-medic. Again, I'm not even a medic. But they were like, you're the only medic, and one of your interpreters has been hit in the head. So I went, and it took me about an hour to get to the patient, to get to my friend. And when I got to him, he'd been hit in the head with shrapnel. They had bandaged him up a bit, but some of his brain was exposed, and he was still. He wasn't dead yet. He was unconscious, but he wasn't dead yet. He was, kicking, and he had covered in vomit and all that. And so that was around noon when I got to him. And then we had to basically, there was nothing I could really do for him. I checked the injury. I checked for additional injuries. Not much I could do. So it was around noon. Well, basically for the next 6 hours, we had to, carry him in a series of carts, and then also hand carry him for miles and miles and miles across the open and through the jungle to get him to the next level of care, which is like basically a paramedic level medic. And so the only way that we were able to do that, though, because we had to carry him for so long, and keep in mind it's 105, 110 degrees in the middle of, it's super humid. It's awful situation. We've been exhausted. We're exhausted because we've been up all night due to the fighting. And so what actually ended up happening was 20, I forget the exact number. I counted it. I forget the number off the top of my head, but it was around 20 or 30 villagers, local village men, came out to help carry the patient. And so they were all taking turns on the Skedco litter, 6 guys at a time, just carrying him for miles and miles. Around 6 p.m., we finally got my interpreter. Again, was like one of my best friends. His name is Babo, and we finally got him to a real medic, like a paramedic. We met him in the jungle. He was coming to meet us, and he did an initial assessment. Babo's O2 sats were so low that they weren't even registering on the pulse ox. So he wasn't going to make it. The only way to get him to that other clinic would be to go through enemy territory, and it would take so even if they were able to get through enemy territory in the middle of the night, which they probably could, they were saying he's going to die on the way. He's not going to make it. And he's gone. So at that point, I had to say goodbye to my friend, and we then hopped in we left him with the medics to try to do as much as they could for him. And then I went back. I had to go back to the front line because there have no medics. None of the medics had returned. So I go back to the front line. I get back to the front line around 1 a.m. Well, I get, I don't know, maybe 3-4 hours of sleep, not even. And then I wake up, it's, 5:30. And the first thing the guys tell me is, hey, we got confirmation. Babo died, 10 minutes ago or something. So, I found that out, and I was dispatching some messages to my crew, some other guys who knew him, so the local leaders, just, hey, this is what happened. As I'm sending out these messages, the village I'm in, explosions just start going off inside the village. And basically the Burma army was doing another attack. They were doing a counterattack on this village. And so that's around 6 a.m., a little bit after dawn. So the Burma army attacks into this village where, they're dumping mortar and 40 millimeter everywhere on top of us as they're doing a frontal ground assault to clear the village. There was one of the guys who'd been in my squad the day before. He took a round right through the head and was killed instantly. And then there were 2 wounded, but the group that I was with didn't have the wounded with us. So I never ended up seeing those guys or treating those guys. So that was just, unfortunately, just another day at the office, dealing with the situation. Now, I say all that because, 3 weeks later, so I survived that. 3 weeks later, we have our ambulances are up and ready to roll. We have our first ambulance, and we're putting the final touches on it, making sure that we can, transport our first patient, making sure everything's organized. And as we're doing that, I'm back at the clinic, back at the good clinic where there's the real doctors. One of the guys on staff there, he says to me, he's like, oh, hey, there's a wounded soldier just got brought in. and they're probably going to need to transport him tomorrow to get him out of the country. And so I thought, oh, great. Okay. I'm, very, very curious to see who our first patient's going to be. So I go down to the clinic to see who our first patient is. Keep in mind, this is 3 weeks after the battle. I walk into the hut, and it's the soldier who had put a tourniquet on 3 weeks earlier, who'd been shot through the knee. He's the patient. He's the very first patient our ambulances are going to transport. And I was just like, and of course I look at the situation. I'm like, dude, what the hell? What is happening? And so I spoke with the guys, and basically the area, the evacuation route had been completely cut off by the Burma army. So they actually had to go back. It's difficult to explain sort of the geography. Anyway, long story short, they tried to stabilize him at this very, very remote outpost. They couldn't stabilize him well enough. And so they had to hand carry him back out to where the battle happened, farther out than that, come completely around, cross the lake, get him in a truck. Because at that point, we didn't have ambulances at the lake or at the bank of the lake either, on the lake or next to the lake. And so they had to carry this guy all the way up to the clinic, and it had taken 3 weeks. And so finally he had arrived the night before, and they were like, hey, we need to evacuate him out of the country. And of course, he's in a really bad way. But so I went and talked with him. He was in good spirits. Ultimately, he got evacuated out of the country. The Stronghold ambulance took him and passed him off to they drove, I think it's like a 5 or 6 hour drive to get him to to the next level where they would, evacuate him out of the country. And ultimately he lost his leg, but he survived. So it's one of those situations where, so actually fast forward a little bit, if I may, about a month later, I was going to speak at a school in Nashville, and while I was traveling to the school, I got a message, and it was an image of a wounded soldier, and this wounded soldier had a tourniquet on his leg. So he'd been hit in the knee by shrapnel. His knee was just completely shattered and destroyed. But he had a tourniquet on his leg in the right spot, and it was showing the local Karen guys loading this patient into one of our ambulances on one of the litters that we had provided. And this patient had been taken to this clinic, and then the doctors, he got there just in time. So the doctors afterwards, after they stabilized him, they messaged me and they said, if he had been 15, 20 minutes later, he'd be dead. And so that's one particular case of a soldier who 100% would be dead right now if we hadn't put in all of this stuff, if we hadn't put in the ambulances and done the training and put the tourniquets with the guys at the front line, and we provide all those supplies as much as we possibly can. So my point with that is it was a quick sort of success story showing the full level of care from the front line, a tourniquet getting put on a patient, evacuating him using a Skedco litter, getting him across the lake. We didn't have the boat ambulance at the time. Getting him across the lake, and then getting him to an ambulance, getting him loaded up. And the best part of that story is that none of my Western team, like none of the foreigners, none of the Stronghold staff was in the country at the time. Everything was 100% run by the locals on their own, using the supplies and the training that we had given them. And then we were back there a few weeks later, but even when we were gone, the system still worked. Yeah, so that's just one particular instance of the difficulty of getting the medical care, but then also the importance of getting it done as quick as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and also a success story when it comes to training, just locals, whether it be medical care or really anything, not just flexing our Western power and money and just buying a bunch of stuff and just kind of dropping it off, working by, with, and through the locals to get them exactly what they need with what their capabilities are, at least at that moment, and then education to kind of upgrade their capabilities. Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, the kind of the medic in me. Obviously they've gotten at least tourniquet training, some kind of hemorrhage control training. Mentioning that patient that had been bleeding for a very long period of time. Do they have medics at least capable of getting like IV or IO access, administering blood? Are the medics out in the field able to do those things?
Yeah, the medics in the field are able to do IVs, and they're actually pretty good in the clinical sort of setting. The problem is the combat setting. One of the big issues I saw with those two medics in particular, really brave guys, really good guys, with dealing with the patient who'd been shot in the leg. But for example, they didn't have trauma shears. So like the idea of exposing the wound and looking at it, like physically getting eyes on it, never crossed their mind. So they'd been dealing with this patient for hours, but they hadn't done that. The patient had an IV in, they had, 3 different windlass, improvised tourniquets on him, and they were doing their best to monitor the situation. But, there was definitely, that was one instance I saw a big gap in the sort of their, I guess we'll call it TCCC, basic TCCC stuff. Yeah. And they don't have blood in the field. They can get blood and do all that at the actual clinic, but in the field there's zero capability of that.
Okay. And that tourniquet thing, that is not unique at all to Burma. I've seen anybody and everybody do the same mistake. So
yeah.
That's just one of those things that just through training and practice, get good at eventually, right?
Yeah.
So it's just listening to that story and just talking with you now, it seems like logistics are an enormous kind of issue. Your organization bringing in things, I'm sure other NGOs doing the same. What are the logistic constraints? Like tourniquets, they're using improvised tourniquets. So I'm guessing things like that are difficult. Bandages, it sounds like they're using improvised bandages. That's one area. Like what other things are difficult to come by?
Sure. So we'll talk about logistics in sort of two phases. The first is how do we get supplies and stuff in. So that's very difficult. And I'm not going to go into the details of how we have to do some of that. But I will say, so one of the biggest obstacles, or probably the 2 biggest obstacles with getting supplies into where we need to get them. Actually, I'm sorry, I need to make it 3. One is geography. So we're dealing with mountainous regions and roads that are dirt. So in dry season, hey, it's fine. It's all good. As soon as it rains for 5 minutes, everything stops working. The second issue is communication. So coordinating and communicating with people that are just a few miles away is a nightmare. If they don't have access to the internet, if they don't have access to, they do what the local tribe we work with does is they have like radio relays where somebody's verbally doing a radio relay to the guy in the next mountain over, and that's how they pass their information. So communication moves very slowly. And then you also, even if you can communicate, even if you do have the supplies and you have a plan to get around the geography, the issue is like, well, now you need trucks, now you need motorcycles. And so, you're dealing with a very, war-torn, impoverished place. And so a lot of times trucks and, things like that are simply not available. And so, in the particular sector where we work, we are actually the only NGO that actually runs ambulances. There's a couple of other NGOs, and they have trucks and things like that they'll use to move supplies. And if someone's injured, of course, they'll throw them in the back. But there's no dedicated, actual, honest to God ambulances with medical professionals, O2 tanks in the back, proper bedding, extra supplies for the medics, fully staffed, on call. There's nothing like that except for ours in this one particular area that we work. So the logistics of making it happen, we're literally just making it happen on our own, where there's no established sort of supply routes that exist. And so it's like we're making all that stuff up as we go. So the challenges are enormous. Huge shout out to the guys on my staff who handle it, particularly Jason and Adam. They do an incredible amount of work and figuring out the logistics and all that. So the first part of logistics is like, okay, how do we get supplies in? So the other thing too with that, so let's say we do get supplies in, and let's say we have 500 tourniquets that we're going to give out to guys. Well, they are in all these remote outposts all over the place, all throughout the jungle. The only way you're going to get to these places is through walking. And so you can only take what you can carry. And so you're limited by how quickly you can walk, how far you can walk, if they know that you're coming, because they might not even be at their little outpost when you get there. And then also being able to do training with them. So it takes weeks and it takes months to train and to provide the medical supplies to guys. Luckily now we have a very, very good relationship with like the local tribal leaders. And so our way of exponentially increasing our logistics capability is we just work with the locals, and we go to one central person who we know and trust, who's completely responsible and who we have worked with for years. And we go, hey, here's the supplies, make sure it gets out to blah, 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 different places. And then they do it. And it still takes time. So that's the logistics on getting stuff in. Now, the logistics on getting stuff out, is essentially the same. So one of the big issues is communication. So patients are injured and nobody really knows what the injury is. We don't know if we need different supplies. We don't really know where the person was injured. A lot of times don't even know exactly where you're going to pick up the patient. So they're trying to coordinate all that stuff. And as you're moving through the mountains, you completely lose even radio communication. So even the radio relays don't work. So if there's any kind of issue, during the hours of transporting the patient through the jungle, which there is all the time, rivers are flooded, log in front of the road, whatever, bad guys moving around. There's these constant challenges, and you can't communicate that those are the issue. So the logistical challenges are basically getting the patients out of there on vehicles. One of the big issues we have is, again, geography. So where we have to evacuate patients across, like particularly war patients, conflict patients, across this massive man-made lake, that takes, again, like up to 2 hours to cross. And so what we've actually done is we've actually built a road, Stronghold. We've had a road built. It doesn't work all year round just because of the rain, but we built a road around that lake so we can now take patients from the front line in a truck, drive them around the lake, and then, drop them off to ambulances. Or if we needed to, we could forward stage ambulances if we know there's going to be a lot of fighting. And then we also have the boat. So that's one of the ways that we're kind of dealing with it. The biggest logistical issue happening right now is the weather. So there are massive, massive amounts of rain. You wouldn't believe the videos and stuff I get of these rivers that are relatively small. And then these raging torrents of these rivers. And they knock out all the bridges, they knock out all the man-made bridges and things like that. But the issue is a lot of the, a lot of the NGOs who've been there for years is, instead of investing in any kind of infrastructure, because it's expensive and it doesn't look as sexy, but it's so important. And so one of the things we're going to be doing this next year is actually helping them build wire bridges and things like that. That'll be good all year round, because right now, for example, again, that gun, or the wounded soldier that came in today, that's going to take him 2 days. It's going to take him 2 days to get to this clinic. And so it's actually good timing, for this podcast, because I was like, what specifically do we need to do to increase this? And they said bridges, which is what I expected them to say. And I was like, all right, so like, we're going to be building bridges. And, so these rivers a lot of times are impassable. So what'll have to happen is, if you're carrying a patient, you can't cross at the bottom of the mountains, because that's where the river is the worst. So you have to go up the mountain. So you have to carry the patient up the mountain, and then you can find a spot where it's only knee deep or waist deep, and then you can carry the patient across this large river at that point. So extremely difficult, excessively difficult in the rain, in the mud. And then one of the other things too is the roads get completely washed out. So our ambulances, when they drive around, they have chains on the tires and all that, just to make it happen. And even then, still, like I said, for the last 2 days, I think the trucks have even been grounded because there's just too much rain. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah. So I imagine with all these logistical constraints, transportation constraints, you've gotten really good at just making stuff happen. What kind of, I guess, improvised things are guys using? You mentioned, improvised tourniquets. Are they doing like chest seals and like?
Yeah. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, guys will use improvised chest seals, plastic bags, things of that nature. For splints, obviously, guys are using sticks and bandages and bandanas and things like that. Again, the locals, one of their tried and true methods is the bamboo pole with the hammock that they put the patient in, and they just have somebody carrying along the IV on a stick. As far as that, though, I haven't seen any, or besides that, rather, I haven't seen too much massive improvisation with anything super crazy. The biggest issue is just the biggest thing that I see is people who they improvise more in their ability to transport. And there's, again, I have like videos of locals carrying a patient on a bamboo pole across a raging river, and on a bridge that's completely, it's no longer horizontal, it's now vertical, but they're laying down sticks, and they're like holding onto the bridge and passing the patient off to other people on the other side of the bridge. If you slip and fall, you're going to die. There's a 1,000% chance you're going to die. So they improvise in that way, but it's more of just courage. They have the courage to do it. And incredibly courageous people, that we work with.
Nice. So, you mentioned, I guess they get to, the good clinic, where they get, sounds like probably a lot of amputations from some of the injuries and tourniquet times you're talking about, which is super unfortunate. How do you, and maybe you're not able to answer, but like the convalescent leave, like obviously you can't just have patients just build up and build up and build up. It's just too much constraint on your resources. How are they, sending people out? Who gets to go into the other country? Who gets pushed over to another village? Who gets just, hang out around here and we'll kind of half keep an eye on you?
Yeah, so that's from what I understand. Again, it's not us taking care of the convalescents. We completely just handle the emergency, just get the people to the clinic. But so I don't want to speak for them too much. But what I will say is, like, what they do is they have a pretty good system. What they do is that I don't know the exact number of patients that they can keep in their facility, but they do keep patients there longer term. For example, we transported, before we had an ambulance, it was actually the impetus for us to start an ambulance. We transported a pregnant lady who's 7 months pregnant. She'd been bleeding for about 12 hours in her hut. We threw her in the back of our truck and got her to the hospital, or to that clinic. And a month later, we actually took her home. But during that month, she had stayed there at the clinic. So they have an actual sort of, they call it like inpatient department, where they take care of people for as long as they need to take care of them. Now, like you said, it's very resource intensive. And so culturally, what happens if you have somebody who's at the hospital, the family comes and helps takes care of the person. They bring food from their own village. Luckily, food typically isn't something that's super scarce, except for in emergency areas where there's fighting. So the family will, bring food, take care of the person, help wash the person as long as possible. They only evacuate patients who are sort of in a life or death situation where they need that higher level of care. And then that's something that they coordinate with the tribal leaders. And then the doctors make that call. It's a case by case basis. Patients only stay there as long as is needed, and then they're eventually taken back to their villages. Now, that's another logistics problem. How do you have somebody who's recovering from an injury? How do you get back to your village? Well, one of the things that our ambulances do as well is when we drop off patients, because we have 3 ambulances. One of them is stationed at the clinic. 2 of them are out in more forward locations, in opposite directions. And so what happens if any of the patients who are good, who need to go back to their village, go back to their area, anytime the ambulances come in to bring in a patient, the people can then hop a ride, can take a ride back to at least closer to their village, maybe not directly to their village, but closer to their village, and then the villagers, take care of them from that point.
Nice. Do the lines, so it's like you mentioned, a village being attacked, do the lines shift that much? Or like, it sounds like this lake must be relatively safe. That's like a key point.
The lake is relatively safe, but even not really. Like the bad guys at any point could kind of cross that lake and cause problems. They bomb the opposite side of the lake. So MiG fighters, Russian MiG fighters come in and drop bombs all the time in those areas. So, that's actually, we had a facility, where we would do medical training at, and, that our organization runs. It was, a small facility. But that place got bombed. They brought in Russian MiGs and hit us with 400 or 500 pound bombs. Luckily, nobody was killed, and a couple of the bombs dudded. But yeah, it's like we can't use that facility anymore, obviously. And so it is still dangerous. The thing is, like, so the Burma Army, the way that they operate as well is they're basically working out of FOBs, just like forward operations bases, just like we would do in the U.S. military. And then they leave on patrols for sometimes days at a time to go in and attack villages or, clearance operations, whatever they want to call them. And then they go back to their FOB. And so, basically your proximity to one of these FOBs is sort of your level of risk. Like if the closer you are, the higher level risk it is. So there are some places that are relatively safe. Your biggest threat is just the bombings. And again, the same logistics problems that we have, the Burma Army also has. So, imagine trying to drive the truck up this single road. Like there's only like 2 roads in the entire area. Imagine trying to drive up that, but there's, 1,000 angry guerrillas who want to, like, whose family lives across the next hill, who are running away, right? Those dudes are going to fight tooth and nail to keep you out of their territory, and protect their families, and rightfully so. So, because of that, the Burma Army has done large clearance operations where they bring in hundreds of soldiers and with air support and all that kind of stuff. We're not really seeing that right now because the Burma Army is more on their back foot. They're kind of staying in their FOBs a little more. But they do these random attacks where they'll leave and they'll just put ground forces in to go attack villages. There was one case, I actually just wrote about it in Black Rifle Coffee's magazine, Coffee or Die. I just had an article come out, I think, last week. One of the situations that happened just a couple miles from where I was at was the Burma Army went into a village at night, right after sunset, I think, and they went in. A bunch of villagers ran away. Most of the villagers ran away, but 17 didn't make it out of the village. And so the Burma Army captured these 17 villagers who were actually ethnic Burmese. They weren't even an ethnic minority group. They were ethnic Burmese, and 8 of the 17 people in that group that were captured were children under the age of 10. And then, of course, they began to commit horrible, unspeakable atrocities against these 17 people, slaughtered them all, burned the bodies, stacked all the bodies, burned them, and left. And then the next day, the village, the pro-democracy village guys, they came back in and, found the location, and the video of that as well. I had that's in the Black Rifle article as well. The video of that aftermath of that massacre. So that stuff happens all the time. So I was actually there, maybe 3 miles away, just in another sector, setting up medical stuff and doing and organizing the guys like we do. When I got that message, they sent that video to me right after it happened the next morning. So, It can happen at any point. Like I said, I've been in a village that's been overrun. The Burma Army also, one of their big things is they fire mortars. They fire mortars, and they have up to like 120 millimeter mortars. They have like 120 millimeter mortars, and they've also got like little 60 millimeter commando mortars that their patrols carry. So that's one of their favorite weapons. And they'll dump those into any village for no reason, any reason, just in the middle of the night, just because. They'll do that all the time. I got a video last week, I want to say, of a 16-year-old boy. He'd been hit in the head with shrapnel from one of the Burma Army mortar explosions, and they sent me the video of his body, his brain was hanging out, blood all over on the ground inside the hut. And his mom is screaming, and, horribly grieving, because of what had just happened. So, and like I said, it's just a normal Wednesday getting videos like that. I have tons of photos and stuff of villagers, slaughtered and killed by the mortars and intentionally killed. So it happens all the time. There are, like I said, some of the areas are relatively safe, and that's where we sort of, that's where we base out of, is the safe areas. But then we go into the very, very dangerous areas to work with the people at the point of injury where things are going to be the worst.
Perfect. So, we're getting close to an hour now. Would you please, anybody who wants to help in any way, what is your organization? How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my organization is called Stronghold Rescue and Relief. Our website is strongholdrescue.org. And so currently right now we don't take volunteers, for example. So all of our staff, this is like their profession. This is their dedicated full-time job. So we work things a little different. We have limits on how many people we bring in. So for example, one team, the maximum size is 4. And usually we're split up into like multiple teams of like 2. And it's people who are on staff. So my point is, if you want to help, volunteering is not one of the ways that we offer. There are other organizations that do great work, and you can volunteer with them. If you do want to support the work that we're doing, basically we just ask if you want to support. We basically subsist off of people who give a monthly donation. That's how we operate, and we limit the amount that people can donate per month during their initial sign up. We max it out at $1 a day. So if people want to, give $1 a day to help and become a supporter and help us out, we'd really appreciate it. And we have thousands of people across the country and around the world who each give basically $1 a day. The average is, I think, 75 cents a day. And that's how we're able to maintain all the stuff that we do, and our staff and all of our equipment and all the ambulances and stuff that we're running in Burma. And then we're also working in other places. I've got a team going out to Mozambique here and next week, and they'll be working with the anti-poaching park rangers. They're going to live with the park rangers, out in the Badlands, providing medical care and training to them. At the same time, they're going to live with them for like a month in the field, and in the same conditions that the rangers live in. And I'm not going on that trip, unfortunately, but but we do this kind of work in a lot of different places. So yeah, if people want to help out, we're also on Instagram and social media, just Stronghold Rescue, if people want to check out more of our work and what we're doing.
Perfect. Thank you, Ephraim. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
That's it for today's podcast. Be sure to go to our website, www.prolongfieldcare.org. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Subscribe and stay on the bleeding edge of combat medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC Podcast.
Hurry, boy, it's waiting there for you. Gonna take a lot to drag you away from you. It's only 100 level.